I should have known something was wrong the moment Daniel suggested that restaurant. He never picked places like that. Expensive, dimly lit, with chandeliers that cost more than our car. But that night, he insisted. Said we needed to talk somewhere nice. Somewhere we could finally fix things. I wanted to believe him. God, how desperately I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could salvage what was left of our marriage. The drive to downtown Chicago felt longer than usual. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight, that muscle in his cheek twitching the way it always did when he was hiding something. I watched him from the passenger seat, studying the man I'd married 5 years ago, wondering when exactly he'd become this stranger sitting next to me. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel, a nervous habit he'd developed over the past few months. Everything about him screamed tension, but I told myself it was just the stress of our failing relationship. When we arrived, the valet took our car, and Daniel placed his hand on the small of my back, guiding me inside. That touch used to make me feel safe. Now it just felt like performance, like he was playing the role of attentive husband for an invisible audience. The restaurant was stunning. Marble floors, velvet chairs, tables set with crystal glasses that caught the light like diamonds. This was the kind of place where Chicago's elite came to see and be seen, where business deals were made over 30-year-old scotch and rare steaks. Our table was in the middle of the dining room, surprisingly exposed for someone who'd been acting so paranoid lately. I would have expected Daniel to request something more private, tucked away in a corner. But he seemed almost resigned as we sat down, like a man walking to his own execution. The waiter appeared immediately, reciting specials in a practiced tone that suggested he'd given this speech 1,000 times. Daniel ordered wine without asking what I wanted. Another small thing. But these days, it was the small things that cut the deepest. I tried to make conversation as we waited for our drinks. Asked him about work, about the project he'd mentioned last week, about anything that might feel normal. But his answers were clipped, distracted. His eyes kept darting around the restaurant, never quite settling on me. And that's when I noticed his phone on the table, screen down, vibrating every few minutes with notifications he refused to check. The wine came. Daniel drank his glass too quickly, immediately pouring another. I sipped mine slowly, my stomach already knotted with anxiety. Something was happening, something he wasn't telling me, and the not knowing was eating me alive. We'd been married long enough that I could read his tells. The way he touched his collar when he was nervous, how he cleared his throat before lying, the fake smile he wore when he was trying to convince me everything was fine. Our appetizers arrived, but neither of us touched them. The silence between us grew heavier, more suffocating. Around us, the restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of wealthy patrons, the soft clink of silverware on china, the occasional burst of laughter from a nearby table. We sat in our own bubble of tension, two people who'd run out of things to say to each other months ago. I was about to break the silence when his phone buzzed again. This time, I saw the screen light up before he could flip it over. Just for a second, but it was enough. A message preview from someone named Marco. "Boss is asking about tonight. Don't fuck this up." My blood ran cold. Boss? What boss? Daniel worked in finance, in an office with fluorescent lights and motivational posters. He didn't have a boss who sent messages like that. Before I could stop myself, I reached across the table and grabbed his phone. Daniel's hand shot out, but I was faster, pulling it into my lap and unlocking it with the passcode I'd memorized months ago, when I first started suspecting something was wrong. His face went white as I scrolled through his messages, through conversations with people I'd never heard of, with references to money, deliveries, payments that made no sense. "Olivia, give me the phone." His voice was low, urgent, but I ignored him. There were dozens of messages, all cryptic, all clearly part of something he'd been hiding from me. References to debts, to jobs, to someone called DeLuca, who apparently controlled everything. My hands started shaking as I read through the evidence of a life I knew nothing about. "Who is Marco?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Who is DeLuca? What the hell have you gotten us into?" Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his voice dropping to an angry whisper. "This is not the place for this conversation. Give me the phone, and we'll talk about it at home." But I was done with his promises to talk later, done with his excuses and his lies. 6 months of strange behavior, of money disappearing from our accounts, of him coming home at odd hours smelling like cigarette smoke even though he'd quit years ago. 6 months of feeling crazy for suspecting him, of being told I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. And here was the proof, right in my hands, that I'd been right all along. "No," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "No more waiting. No more lies. Tell me right now what you've been doing. Tell me why you have messages from criminals on your phone. Tell me why someone named Marco is threatening you about tonight." People at nearby tables were starting to glance our way. Daniel's face flushed red with anger and something else. Fear. Real, genuine fear that made my stomach drop. "Olivia, I'm serious. Lower your voice. You don't understand what you're doing." But I was past caring about making a scene. I was past caring about anything except getting answers. "I don't care who hears us. I don't care if everyone in this restaurant knows what a liar you are. You've been lying to me for months, maybe longer, and I deserve to know why." The words came pouring out of me. Months of frustration and hurt and suspicion, finally finding release. I accused him of everything I'd been too afraid to say out loud. The affairs I suspected. The money I knew he was hiding. The late nights that had no explanation. My voice got louder with each accusation, fueled by wine and rage, and the liberating feeling of finally speaking my truth. Daniel's eyes widened, and he reached across the table, trying to grab my hand, trying to shut me up. "Olivia, please. Please. You need to stop talking right now. Lower your voice. You'll regret this later." There was something desperate in his tone, something beyond embarrassment or anger. It was pure terror. "Regret it? I already regret marrying you. I regret believing your lies, trusting you with our future, wasting 5 years of my life on someone who..." And that's when I saw it. The change in his expression, the way his face went from red to deathly pale in an instant. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking past me, over my shoulder, at something, or someone, behind me. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but no sound came out. I'd never seen him look like that before, like he'd just seen his own death walking toward him. The restaurant seemed to quiet around us, conversations dropping to whispers or stopping altogether. I felt a presence behind me, a shift in the air that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. Slowly, reluctantly, I turned to look. The man standing 3 tables behind us was impossible not to notice, even though he'd clearly been sitting there the entire time. How had I missed him? He was impeccably dressed, in what I could tell even from a distance was a custom-tailored suit. Charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that probably cost more than my yearly salary. His hair was styled in that effortlessly perfect way that spoke of expensive barbers and quality products, dark and sleek, with just enough silver at the temples to add gravitas without aging him. But it was his presence that truly commanded attention, the way he sat with absolute stillness, like a predator so confident in his position that he didn't need to move. He wasn't eating, I realized. His plate sat untouched in front of him, a glass of what looked like whiskey in his hand. And he was watching us. Not casually glancing over, not accidentally overhearing our fight. He was watching us with the focused intensity of someone studying a particularly interesting specimen. His dark eyes, even from this distance, seemed to see everything, understand everything, weigh everything on some internal scale I couldn't begin to comprehend. 2 men flanked him at his table, both built like walls, wearing suits that couldn't quite hide the bulk of their shoulders, or the telltale bulges that suggested they were carrying weapons. They weren't eating either. They were watching, just like their boss, alert and ready, their eyes scanning the restaurant with professional efficiency. I turned back to Daniel, and the look on his face confirmed what my instincts were screaming. This man, whoever he was why Daniel had been so desperate for me to keep quiet. This was the danger he'd been trying to warn me about. "Daniel?" I whispered, my anger suddenly evaporating into something much colder. "Who is that?" He couldn't seem to form words. His hands were shaking visibly now, his wine glass trembling as he lifted it to his lips and drained what was left. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the restaurant's perfect climate control. That's Lorenzo De Luca," he finally managed, his voice barely audible. The name hit me like a physical blow. Lorenzo De Luca. Even I knew that name, and I didn't follow organized crime or read those kinds of news stories. But you couldn't live in Chicago without hearing about the De Lucas, about the family that had their hands in everything from construction to shipping to God knows what else. The family that made people disappear when they became inconvenient. The family that the FBI had been trying to take down for 3 generations without success. Why? My throat was so dry I could barely speak. Why is Lorenzo De Luca watching us? Why does he care about our fight? Daniel's eyes met mine, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Not just fear, but guilt so profound it seemed to physically pain him. "Because I work for him," he whispered. "Because I owe him money. Because—" He swallowed hard. "Because he's the reason I suggested we come here tonight. He wanted to see you." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. Daniel worked at a financial firm downtown. He had an office on the 14th floor with a view of the lake. He went to work in suits and came home complaining about quarterly reports and difficult clients. He didn't work for the Mafia. He couldn't work for the Mafia. But even as I tried to deny it, pieces started falling into place. The strange hours, the unexplained money problems despite his supposed raises, the phone calls he took in the garage, in the bathroom, anywhere I couldn't hear. The way he'd started drinking more, sleeping less, looking over his shoulder constantly. The way he'd changed from the man I married into this nervous, secretive stranger. "How long?" I asked, my voice hollow. "How long have you been working for him?" 8 months, Daniel admitted, and something in me broke. 8 months. Not weeks, not a recent mistake, but 8 months of living a double life, of lying to me every single day, of dragging me into something dangerous without my knowledge or consent. It started small, just some investment advice, moving some money around. But then, he ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of helplessness that would have made me sympathetic once. Now it just made me angry again. I made a mistake, lost some of his money in a deal that went bad. He gave me a chance to make it right, but everything I tried just made it worse. "How much worse?" I demanded. "How much do you owe him?" $250,000. The number was so large it seemed abstract, impossible. We didn't have that kind of money. We barely had $50,000 in savings, and most of that was supposed to be for the down payment on the house we'd been planning to buy. The house that was never going to happen now, because my husband had apparently been gambling with Mafia money and losing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to pick up my wine glass and throw it at his lying face. But I couldn't do any of those things because Lorenzo De Luca was still watching us, and I was suddenly, terrifyingly aware that this restaurant, this conversation, this entire night had been orchestrated by him. We weren't here to fix our marriage. We were here because a Mafia boss had decided we needed to be here. "Why did he want to see me?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "What does any of this have to do with me?" Daniel looked like he might be sick. He needed to know if you knew, if you were part of it, or if you were just collateral. The word hung between us like a death sentence. Collateral. That's what I was to the most dangerous man in Chicago. Not a person, not Daniel's wife, just collateral in a debt my husband had accumulated through his own stupidity and greed. The anger that flooded through me then was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It was pure, righteous fury at being reduced to a bargaining chip, at having my life put at risk without my knowledge, at being brought to this restaurant to be evaluated like livestock. "You son of a bitch," I hissed. "You brought me here so he could look at me? So he could decide if I was useful or just a loose end to tie up?" "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Daniel? Explain to me how this is anything other than you serving me up to a criminal to save your own ass." And my voice had risen again, and this time I didn't care. Let the whole restaurant hear. Let Lorenzo De Luca hear every word. I was done being quiet, done being manageable, done playing along with Daniel's plans that only ever seemed to benefit him. And that's when it happened. Lorenzo De Luca stood up. The movement was graceful, unhurried, but it commanded absolute attention. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the waiters seemed to freeze in place. He said something quietly to the men at his table, then began walking toward us with the confidence of a man who owned not just the restaurant, but probably the entire block it sat on. He was taller than I'd realized, probably 6'2" or 6'3", with the kind of build that suggested he spent time in the gym but wasn't obsessive about it. The closer he got, the more details I noticed. The subtle pattern in his suit, the platinum cufflinks at his wrists, the watch that probably cost more than our car. But it was his face that held my attention. He was handsome in that dangerous way that made smart women stupid, with strong features, a jaw that could cut glass, and those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense, every lie, every secret you'd ever kept. As he approached our table, I caught the scent of his cologne. Expensive, subtle, something with notes of leather and cedar that probably had a name I couldn't pronounce. He moved like a man completely comfortable in his own skin, like someone who'd never doubted his place in the world or his right to take up space in it. Daniel tried to stand, but his legs seemed to give out, and he half collapsed back into his chair. I remained sitting, frozen, unable to do anything but watch as Chicago's most feared crime boss stopped beside our table and looked down at us with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Good evening," Lorenzo said, his voice smooth and cultured, with just a hint of an accent that suggested Italian roots despite his perfect English. I hope I'm not interrupting. It was a polite fiction, of course. He knew exactly what he was interrupting, had probably heard every word of our fight. The slight curve of his lips suggested he found the entire situation amusing. Up close, he was even more intimidating. Not because he looked threatening, quite the opposite. He looked refined, civilized, like someone who belonged at charity galas and opera houses. But there was something in his eyes, a coldness beneath the charm, that reminded you exactly who and what he was. This was a man who could order someone's death between sips of wine and sleep soundly afterward. Daniel finally found his voice, though it came out embarrassingly high-pitched. "Mr. De Luca, we were just having a discussion," Lorenzo finished smoothly. "Yes, I gathered that. Quite a passionate one." His eyes moved to me, and I felt pinned by that gaze like a butterfly under glass. He studied me for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Russo, I presume? Your husband has told me very little about you. An oversight on his part, I think. I didn't know what to say. Didn't know the protocol for meeting a Mafia boss who your husband owed $250,000. Should I be polite? Defiant? Terrified?" I settled for honest. "He's told me nothing about you until about 5 minutes ago, so I suppose we're even." Something flickered in Lorenzo's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. One corner of his mouth twitched upward. Honest. I appreciate that. He pulled out the empty chair at our table and sat without asking permission, settling into it with the casual authority of someone who never needed to ask for anything. Daniel, why don't you tell your wife the truth? All of it. This time. I already told her. You told her the sanitized version. The one where you're just a victim of circumstance, where bad luck and poor judgment got you into this mess. Lorenzo's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Tell her what you actually did. Tell her about the offshore accounts you set up without my permission. Tell her about the money you skimmed, thinking I wouldn't notice. Tell her about the deal you tried to make with the Bianchis behind my back. Each revelation hit me like a physical blow. Daniel had gone pale again, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The Bianchis. Even I knew that name. The rival family that had been trying to muscle in on DeLuca territory for years. Daniel hadn't just made a mistake with Lorenzo's money. He'd actively betrayed him, tried to play both sides, thought he was smart enough to outmaneuver the most powerful crime family in Chicago. You idiot, I breathed, staring at my husband with something beyond anger now. This was horror, pure and simple. You didn't just lose his money. You tried to steal from him. You tried to make deals with his enemies. I looked at Lorenzo, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. That's why we're here. That's why you wanted to see me. You're trying to figure out if I was part of it. Very perceptive, Lorenzo acknowledged. Though I must admit, watching your reaction to these revelations, listening to your fight earlier, I believe I have my answer. You knew nothing about any of this. You're as much a victim of your husband's stupidity as I am. He turned his attention back to Daniel with an expression of mild disappointment. You put your wife in danger, Daniel. You brought her into this world without her knowledge, without preparing her, without even giving her a choice. That shows a profound lack of respect. I was trying to protect her, Daniel protested weakly. I didn't want her involved in any of this. Protection? Lorenzo's voice hardened. You call lies and secrecy protection? You call dragging her to a restaurant where my men are positioned, where the Bianchis have someone watching through the window, where every conversation could be recorded. You call that protection? He shook his head slowly. No, Daniel, that's cowardice. That's using your wife as a shield while pretending you're keeping her safe. I felt ice water in my veins. The Bianchis are watching us right now? A man across the street with a telephoto lens, Lorenzo confirmed casually, as if discussing the weather. They've been trying to figure out my connection to your husband for weeks. Tonight's little scene has probably given them all the confirmation they needed. By tomorrow morning, they'll know everything, including where you live, where you work, the names of your friends and family. The restaurant seemed to tilt around me. This wasn't just about Daniel's debts anymore. This was about rival crime families and surveillance and being a target in a war I didn't even know was happening. I need to leave, I said, starting to stand. I need to go home. Pack. Get out of the city. Sit down, Mrs. Russo. It wasn't a request. Lorenzo's voice had gone cold, and for the first time, I heard the authority that made grown men fear him. I sat, my legs trembling. Running right now would be the worst possible decision. The Bianchis would interpret it as guilt, as proof that you're involved in whatever they think your husband has been doing. You'd have a target on your back before you made it to the highway. Then what am I supposed to do? I could hear the hysteria creeping into my voice. Just sit here and wait for someone to kill me because my husband is a lying, cheating, backstabbing... I'm trying to fix this, Daniel interrupted desperately. Mr. DeLuca, I told you, I'm working on getting the money. The investment I mentioned, it's going to pay off next month, and then I can pay you back everything, plus interest. Just give me a little more time. Lorenzo laughed, but there was no humor in it. The investment that doesn't exist? The one you invented to buy yourself another few weeks? He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then turned the screen toward Daniel. I couldn't see what was on it, but I watched my husband's face crumble as whatever hope he'd been clinging to evaporated. I've had people checking your story since you first mentioned this miraculous investment. There is no deal. There is no money coming. There's just more lies stacked on top of lies, but I can still— You were planning to run, Lorenzo interrupted quietly. Friday night, you had tickets to Sao Paulo, a bag packed in your car trunk, and $50,000 in cash withdrawn from your accounts over the past 3 weeks. You were going to disappear and leave your wife here to face the consequences of your actions. The words landed like bombs. I stared at Daniel, waiting for him to deny it, to explain, to give me any reason not to believe what Lorenzo was saying. But he couldn't meet my eyes. He just sat there, shoulders slumped, caught in a lie so big that there was no way to talk his way out of it. You were going to leave me, I said flatly. It wasn't a question. The evidence was right there in his guilty silence, in the way he wouldn't look at me. You were going to take our money and run to Brazil while I stayed here to deal with the Mafia and your debts and God knows what else. I was going to send for you, he mumbled. Once I got settled, once I figured things out, I was going to bring you down there. Liar! The word exploded out of me. I was standing again, no longer caring about Lorenzo or the Bianchis or anyone else. You're still lying. Even now, even with everything exposed, you can't stop lying. Lorenzo watched our confrontation with the detached interest of someone observing a particularly engaging play. He sipped his whiskey, occasionally glancing at his men to ensure the restaurant remained secure, but mostly he just observed. And somehow that made it worse. Knowing that our marriage's final implosion was entertainment for Chicago's most dangerous criminal. The tickets were one way, Lorenzo added helpfully, pulling out another piece of information like a magician producing cards. Both tickets, both in your husband's name. There was never any plan to bring you, Mrs. Russo. He was going to disappear, let you face the music alone, and probably start a new life with whatever money he managed to steal. Daniel's face had gone from pale to almost gray. That's not. I was going to change the second ticket to her name later once— Show her the document, Lorenzo interrupted, his voice taking on that steel edge again. The one you had drawn up last week. Go ahead, Daniel. Show your wife what you were really planning. My husband's hands shook as he pulled out his phone, scrolled through it, then reluctantly turned it toward me. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. Legal documents, something about power of attorney and estate planning, and divorce papers. Unsigned, undated, but clearly prepared and ready to file, with a settlement that left me with nothing, that somehow transferred all our joint assets into accounts I didn't have access to. You were going to divorce me, I said numbly. You were going to clean out our accounts, file for divorce while you were in Brazil, and leave me with nothing. I needed a clean break, Daniel said, and there was almost something like defiance in his voice now. You don't understand the pressure I've been under, the things I've had to do just to survive. I made some mistakes, yes, but I was trying to fix them. The only way out was to start over, and I couldn't do that if I was still tied to— He cut himself off, but the damage was done. Tied to me. That's what he was going to say. His wife of 5 years, the woman he'd promised to love and cherish, had become an anchor he needed to cut loose. I sat back down slowly, feeling like all the air had been knocked out of my lungs. This wasn't just betrayal. This was systematic, planned abandonment. Every smile over the past few months, every "I love you," every promise that things would get better, all of it had been a performance while he prepared his exit strategy. How long have you been planning this? I asked quietly. How long have you been lying to my face while plotting to leave me with nothing? Daniel wouldn't answer, but Lorenzo did. 3 months, since he realized the Bianchis knew about his attempted double-dealing, and the situation became too dangerous to handle. He's been slowly moving assets, making arrangements, preparing his escape while telling you everything was fine. 3 months. 90 days of living with someone who was actively planning to destroy my life. 90 days of being the fool who believed her husband's promises. The worst part was how good he'd been at it. There had been moments, even recently, where I'd thought maybe we were turning a corner. Little gestures of affection, surprise dinners, talks about our future. All of it calculated to keep me complacent while he built his exit. "I think I'm going to be sick," I managed, and I wasn't sure if I was speaking literally or metaphorically. My stomach churned with a mixture of rage and nausea and betrayal so profound it felt physical. Lorenzo signaled to a waiter, who appeared instantly with a glass of water. "Drink," he commanded, and I did, grateful for something to do with my shaking hands. He waited until I'd taken several sips before continuing. "Now you understand why we're having this conversation. Not because I'm cruel, but because you needed to know the truth. All of it. No more comfortable lies." "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "To me, I mean, what happens to me?" "That depends," Lorenzo said thoughtfully. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with those dark, calculating eyes. "Your husband owes me $250,000 that he doesn't have and never will have. He's also betrayed my trust, attempted to work with my enemies, and generally proven himself to be a liability I cannot afford. The Bianchis believe you're involved in his schemes, which makes you a target. And as of about 3 minutes ago, when I confirmed Daniel was planning to abandon you, you became significantly more interesting to me." I didn't like the way he said, "interesting." It suggested I'd gone from being irrelevant collateral to being something else, though I wasn't sure what. "Interesting how?" "You're innocent," Lorenzo said simply. "Genuinely innocent, not just technically. You didn't know about your husband's activities, didn't benefit from his crimes, didn't participate in his plans. That's actually quite rare in my experience. Usually, the wives know something, even if they pretend they don't." "I should have known," I said bitterly. "The signs were all there. I wanted to believe him." "Love makes us stupid," Lorenzo observed, not unkindly. "It makes us ignore evidence, rationalize behavior, accept explanations that don't quite add up. Your husband exploited that. He used your trust against you." He paused, then added, "But that's not your fault. That's his." It was such a strange moment, sitting in a restaurant with a Mafia boss who was showing me more understanding and honesty than my own husband had in months. I should have been terrified of Lorenzo, should have been trying to escape, should have been doing anything except feeling grateful that someone was finally telling me the truth. "So, what are my options?" I asked, trying to focus on practicalities instead of the emotional devastation. Because it sounds like I'm in danger whether I stay or go, whether I'm involved or not. "Smart question," Lorenzo approved. He finished his whiskey, set the glass down with precise care. "Option 1. You walk out of here tonight, go home, pretend this conversation never happened. The Bianchis will continue to believe you're involved, will eventually move against you to hurt your husband. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, never knowing when the threat will materialize." "That's a terrible option." "Yes, it is. Option 2. You testify against your husband, turn state's evidence, tell the authorities everything you know, which admittedly isn't much. You'd go into witness protection, get a new identity, start over somewhere far from Chicago. Of course, that assumes the authorities can actually protect you, which is a generous assumption given how many people I have on various payrolls." "Also terrible. Also yes." Lorenzo's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. "Option 3 is more complicated, and it requires you to trust me, which I realize is asking a lot given the circumstances. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Trust you? You're a crime boss. You're the person I should trust least in this entire situation. Am I? He tilted his head slightly. I'm the only person who's been honest with you tonight. I'm the only one who's shown you evidence instead of lies. I'm the only one who hasn't tried to manipulate you for my own benefit. He gestured toward Daniel, who'd been silent during this exchange, looking smaller and more pathetic with each passing minute. Can you say the same about your husband? He had a point, as much as I hated to admit it. Daniel had done nothing but lie, manipulate, and betray me. Lorenzo, for all his criminal activities, had at least been straightforward. There was something refreshing about that, about dealing with someone whose evil was honest instead of hidden behind promises and wedding vows. What's option 3? I asked, not sure I wanted to know, but certain I needed to hear it. Lorenzo leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his expression becoming serious. You accept my protection. You let me handle the situation with your husband, with the Bianchis, with all the complications he's created. In return, you provide me with something I need. I don't have any money, I said quickly. I don't have information or connections or anything valuable to. You have yourself, Lorenzo interrupted. Your reputation, your innocence. He held up a hand to forestall my protest. Not in any way you're imagining. I don't need or want that kind of leverage. What I need is exactly what you are. Someone genuinely uninvolved. Someone the authorities will believe. Someone who can be a witness to certain events, without any suspicion of bias. I stared at him, trying to understand. You want me to be your alibi? Among other things. I need someone whose word would be trusted in legal settings, whose background check would come up clean, whose testimony would be believed because they have no connection to my organization beyond being a victim of circumstances. He watched my face carefully. I'm not asking you to lie. I'm not asking you to commit crimes. I'm asking you to be in certain places at certain times, to truthfully report what you see, and to allow your presence to provide context for my activities. It was manipulation, but at least it was honest manipulation. He was being clear about what he wanted and what he was offering in return. And if I say no, then we're back to options 1 or 2, neither of which ends well for you. Lorenzo's voice was matter of fact, not threatening, just stating reality. Your husband has created a situation where you have no good choices, only less bad ones. I'm offering you the least bad option. I looked at Daniel, really looked at him, trying to find any reason to choose him over this terrifying alternative. He stared back at me with desperate, pleading eyes, and I waited for him to say something, to offer some solution, to prove that he was worth fighting for despite everything he'd done. But he just sat there, silent and defeated, knowing he had no cards left to play. Please, Liv, he finally whispered, using the nickname that had once made me smile. Don't do this. Don't trust him. He's a monster. Whatever he's offering, it's a trap. As opposed to the trap you set for me, I shot back. The one where you were going to leave me to face your enemies alone while you started a new life in South America. That kind of trap? I was trying to protect myself, Daniel admitted, and at least that was honest. I made mistakes. I panicked. And yes, I was going to run. But we're married, Liv. For better or worse. You can't just abandon me for him. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. He'd been planning to abandon me, had literally bought plane tickets and drawn up divorce papers. But now he wanted to invoke the sanctity of our marriage vows. I felt something inside me finally snap. Some last thread of loyalty or hope or whatever had been keeping me tethered to this man. You abandoned me first, I said quietly. 8 months ago, when you started working for criminals without telling me. 3 months ago, when you started planning your escape. Tonight, when you brought me here to be evaluated by the Mafia like livestock. Every single one of those moments, you chose yourself over us. So don't you dare lecture me about abandonment. Lorenzo had been watching this exchange with interest, but now he spoke up. Mr. Russo, I think you should know that your wife's decision, whatever it is, won't actually affect your situation. You owe me money you don't have. You betrayed my trust. You tried to work with my enemies. Those facts remain true regardless of what Mrs. Russo chooses to do. Daniel's face crumbled. Please, I have a family. You had a family, I corrected coldly. You gave that up when you decided we were expendable. The truth was, I'd already made my decision. Maybe I'd made it the moment I read those messages on his phone, or when Lorenzo revealed the divorce papers, or when I realized Daniel had been planning to leave me to face his mistakes alone. The specifics didn't matter. What mattered was that I understood, with perfect clarity, that staying with Daniel meant drowning with him. And I wasn't ready to drown. I'll do it, I told Lorenzo. I'll accept your protection, provide whatever testimony you need, be wherever you need me to be. In exchange, you keep me safe from the Bianchis and anyone else who might see me as a target. A wise choice, Lorenzo said with satisfaction. He pulled a card from his pocket and slid it across the table to me. This number reaches me directly, 24 hours a day. Use it if you need anything. And I mean anything. Food, money, medical care, legal assistance, or just someone to talk to. You're under my protection now, which means your well-being is my responsibility. I took the card, feeling its expensive weight in my hand. It was simple. Cream-colored cardstock with just a phone number embossed in black. No name, no address, nothing to identify who it belonged to. But I knew that number would connect me to more power than I'd ever had access to in my life. What about him? I asked, nodding toward Daniel without looking at him. I couldn't look at him. If I looked at him, I might see something that would make me doubt, and I needed to be certain about this. Your husband and I have matters to discuss, Lorenzo said diplomatically. They don't concern you anymore. I'll have Marco drive you home so you can collect anything you want to keep. Tomorrow, you'll move to a secure location while we sort out the complications. You won't go back to your old life, Mrs. Russo. That life ended tonight. It should have been terrifying. It should have felt like a loss. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in months, like I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't even realized was crushing me. I understand, I said. When do we? Now. Lorenzo stood, and immediately his 2 men were there, flanking him. One of them, Marco, I assumed, offered me his arm like a gentleman helping a lady from her seat. Say goodbye to your husband if you wish, or don't. It's your choice. I stood on shaky legs, gathering my purse, my phone, the remnants of my dignity. I should say something, I thought. Some final words to mark the end of 5 years of marriage. But what was there to say? Everything important had already been said, and anything else would just be performative. Daniel grabbed my hand as I started to walk away. Liv, please. Don't leave me with him. You don't know what he'll do to me. I looked down at his hand on mine. The hand that had slipped a wedding ring on my finger 5 years ago. That had held mine during our vows. That had touched me with what I'd believed was love. I pulled away gently, but firmly. You should have thought about that before you lied to me, before you betrayed me, before you planned to abandon me. I met his eyes one last time. Goodbye, Daniel. I hope you find what you were looking for in Brazil. His face went slack with shock as he realized I'd known about São Paulo, that Lorenzo had told me everything. Then Marco's hand was on my elbow, guiding me away from the table, away from my husband, away from the wreckage of my marriage. As we walked through the restaurant, I was aware of every eye on us. The other diners had watched the entire drama unfold, had seen me align myself with Lorenzo De Luca, had witnessed me choosing the Mafia over my husband. Tomorrow, this story would be all over Chicago society. I'd be notorious, talked about, judged. I discovered I didn't care. We passed Lorenzo's table and he fell into step beside me. "You handled that well," he observed. "Better than most people would in your situation." "I don't feel like I handled anything well," I admitted. "I feel like I'm in shock and operating on autopilot." "That's normal. The shock will wear off. Probably tonight once you're somewhere safe and the adrenaline fades. When it does, call me if you need to." His voice softened slightly. "This wasn't an easy choice you made. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." We reached the restaurant's entrance. A sleek black car waited at the curb. Probably cost more than my first apartment. Marco opened the back door, but before I got in, I turned to Lorenzo. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you do this? Why expose Daniel's plans? You could have just dealt with him, without involving me. Why tell me everything?" Lorenzo considered the question for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Because you deserve to know the truth. Because leaving you ignorant would have been its own kind of cruelty. And because..." He paused, then continued quietly. "Because someone should have protected you. And since your husband wouldn't do it, I decided I would." It was possibly the most unexpected thing he could have said. This man, this criminal, this person I should fear above all others, had shown me more consideration than my own husband. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "Don't thank me yet," Lorenzo replied with a slight smile. "We haven't sorted out the difficult parts, but you're welcome." He nodded toward the car. "Marco will take care of you. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll start dealing with the practicalities." I slid into the car's leather interior, and Marco closed the door behind me. Through the tinted window, I watched Lorenzo return to the restaurant, probably to have whatever conversation awaited Daniel. Part of me wondered what would happen in that conversation, what consequences my husband would face. But mostly, I felt nothing. The man I'd married had died somewhere in the past 8 months, replaced by a stranger who'd been willing to sacrifice me to save himself. The car pulled away from the restaurant, and I watched the building recede in the side mirror until it disappeared around a corner. Marco drove in silence, giving me space to process everything that had just happened. I appreciated that. I wasn't ready for conversation, wasn't ready to examine too closely what I'd just done. My phone buzzed. Daniel, of course. Multiple messages, increasingly desperate. I turned it off without reading them. Whatever he had to say didn't matter anymore. He'd had months to be honest with me, months to include me in his decisions, months to treat me like a partner instead of an obstacle to be managed. He'd chosen to lie instead, and now he'd have to live with the consequences. We drove through Chicago's nighttime streets, past restaurants and bars where normal people were having normal evenings, unaware that their city was controlled by men like Lorenzo De Luca. I'd been one of those oblivious people just hours ago. Now, I was on the inside, seeing the mechanisms that ran underneath the surface. It should have scared me. Instead, I felt strangely calm, like I'd finally stopped fighting a current and allowed it to carry me where it would. Marco pulled up to my apartment building, a modest place in Lincoln Park that Daniel and I had rented 3 years ago. "Take your time," he said, the first words he'd spoken since we left the restaurant. "I'll wait here. Pack whatever you need, but travel light. We'll arrange for the rest to be moved later." I nodded and got out, my legs still unsteady as I walked to the entrance. The building felt different somehow, like I was seeing it for the last time. Which I was, I realized. Lorenzo had been clear. I wouldn't be coming back here, wouldn't be returning to this life. Everything was about to change. The apartment was exactly as we'd left it. Daniel's jacket on the back of the couch. Dishes in the sink from breakfast. The remains of our ordinary life, frozen in time. I walked through the rooms like a ghost, touching familiar objects, saying goodbye to a version of myself that had believed her biggest problem was a troubled marriage. In the bedroom, I pulled out a suitcase and began packing mechanically. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, the few pieces of jewelry that had been my grandmother's. I paused at my wedding ring, staring at the simple gold band that had symbolized promises we'd both broken. Him through lies, me through leaving. After a moment's hesitation, I pulled it off and set it on the dresser. I wouldn't need it where I was going. As I packed, my mind kept returning to Lorenzo's words. Someone should have protected you. The statement had been so matter-of-fact, as if protection was something I deserved, something I should have had all along. Daniel had always framed his lies as protection. I didn't want to worry you. I was handling it. I was trying to keep you safe. But real protection, I was beginning to understand, looked different. Real protection involved honesty, even when the truth was hard. My phone was still off, but I could imagine Daniel's messages. Probably apologizing, promising to fix everything, swearing he hadn't really been planning to leave me. More lies stacked on top of lies. He'd never learned that sometimes the truth, however painful, was better than comfortable deception. I found myself wondering what would happen to him. Lorenzo had been vague about consequences, but I wasn't naive. Men like Lorenzo De Luca didn't forgive betrayal, didn't accept excuses about pressure and mistakes. Daniel had played a dangerous game with people who took games seriously, and he'd lost. Whatever came next for him would probably not be pleasant. I waited for guilt to arrive, for some feeling of remorse about abandoning my husband in his time of need. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt an odd sense of justice. Daniel had been willing to leave me to face his consequences alone. Now he'd get to experience what that felt like. It wasn't revenge exactly. More like balance. The universe correcting itself. The suitcase was nearly full when I heard a key in the lock. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding. That couldn't be Daniel. He was still at the restaurant with Lorenzo. But who else had keys to our apartment? The door opened, and I heard footsteps in the living room. Male footsteps, heavy and unfamiliar. I grabbed my phone, turned it on, ready to call Marco or Lorenzo or the police. But before I could decide who to call, a voice rang out. "Mrs. Russo? Marco sent me to help with your bags. Name's Tony." I sagged with relief, then felt foolish for being scared in my own home. Except it wasn't my home anymore, was it? This was just a place I used to live, a shell I was leaving behind. "I'm almost done," I called back. "Just a few more minutes." Tony appeared in the bedroom doorway. Another large man in an expensive suit, clearly one of Lorenzo's people. He looked around the room with professional interest, probably cataloging exits and security risks out of habit. "Take your time, ma'am. Though Mr. De Luca did ask me to mention that your husband's family has been trying to reach you. His mother called the restaurant about 10 minutes ago, very upset. You might want to prepare for that." Of course, Daniel would have called his mother, probably crying about how I'd abandoned him, how I'd chosen a criminal over family. She'd believe him too. Mrs. Russo had always thought her son could do no wrong, had always found ways to excuse his mistakes and blame others. I'd be the villain in whatever story he told. "Let them be upset," I said, surprised by the hardness in my own voice. "They don't know the truth, and I'm not interested in explaining it to them." Tony nodded approvingly. "Good. Family loyalty's important, but not when it's misplaced. Your husband made his choices. You made yours. That's all anyone needs to know." It was oddly comforting, hearing that pragmatic assessment from a stranger. I finished packing, zipped the suitcase closed, and took one last look around the bedroom. 5 years of marriage, reduced to one bag. It should have felt sad. Instead, it felt liberating. "I'm ready," I told Tony. He took my suitcase, and I followed him back through the apartment, turning off lights as I went. At the door, I paused, looking back at the empty rooms. Somewhere in this apartment was the woman I'd been this morning. Naive, trusting, determined to fix her failing marriage. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone harder. Someone who'd learned that sometimes survival meant making impossible choices. "Goodbye," I whispered to the empty apartment. To my old life. To the person I'd been. Then I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. Marco was waiting by the car, and between him and Tony, they had my suitcase loaded in seconds. I slid back into the leather seats, and we pulled away from the curb. I didn't look back this time. There was no point. Everything I was leaving behind was already lost. I'd just finally accepted it. "Where are we going?" I asked Marco. "Safe house in the suburbs," he replied. "Nice place, quiet neighborhood, completely secure. You'll stay there until Mr. DeLuca sorts out the situation with the Bianchis. Could be a few days, could be a few weeks. Depends on how complicated things get." "And then what?" Marco glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Then you start over, ma'am. New apartment, new routine, new life. Mr. DeLuca will help with all that. He's good at fresh starts." I leaned back against the seat, letting the car's motion lull me. The shock was starting to wear off, just like Lorenzo had predicted, and underneath it was exhaustion so profound I could barely keep my eyes open. It had been the longest night of my life, and it wasn't even midnight yet. "Can I ask you something?" I said to Marco. "Sure." "Do you think I made the right choice, accepting Lorenzo's protection?" Marco was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think you made the only choice that gave you a chance at survival," he finally said. "Your husband burned your life down around you. You can't put out a fire by standing in it. Sometimes you gotta get clear, let it burn, and start fresh once the smoke clears." It was simple wisdom, but it helped. I hadn't betrayed Daniel. He'd betrayed himself, betrayed us, betrayed everything we'd built together. I'd just refused to burn with him. That wasn't weakness or disloyalty. That was self-preservation. My phone buzzed again. I'd forgotten to turn it back off. More messages from Daniel, increasingly frantic. One caught my eye despite my intention to ignore them all. "They're taking me somewhere. Please live. Don't let them kill me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Not out of cruelty, but out of acceptance. Daniel had made his choices, and they'd led him here. I couldn't save him, couldn't fix this, couldn't make it better. All I could do was save myself and let him face whatever consequences came. The car merged onto the highway, heading north toward the suburbs. Through the window, I watched Chicago's skyline recede into the distance. All those lights representing lives, stories, people going about their business unaware of the drama playing out in their midst. Tomorrow, I'd be one of them again. Just another person living in the city, trying to build a life. But I'd know what they didn't. How quickly everything could fall apart. How easily trust could be betrayed. How sometimes the monsters were the people you slept next to every night. "Almost there," Marco said, pulling off the highway onto a tree-lined street. Nice houses, well-maintained lawns, the kind of neighborhood where people raised families and barbecued on weekends. We pulled into the driveway of a modest 2-story house, nothing flashy or suspicious. Perfect camouflage. Inside, the house was furnished simply but comfortably. Marco showed me around. Living room, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom. Everything I'd need for an indefinite stay. There's food in the fridge, more in the pantry. Security system is armed, cameras on all entrances. Tony will be in the guest house out back if you need anything. Otherwise, you've got privacy. Thank you, I said. For everything. For driving me. For being kind. For not judging. Marco's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Russo, I've been with Mr. DeLuca for 15 years. I've seen a lot of situations like yours. People caught up in things they didn't choose, paying for someone else's mistakes. He doesn't offer protection lightly. If he says he'll keep you safe, he means it. You made the right call trusting him. After Marco left, I stood in the quiet house, feeling the weight of the day finally settle on my shoulders. I should probably cry, I thought. Should probably have some kind of emotional breakdown about my marriage ending, my life imploding, everything changing in the space of one dinner. But the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt a strange crystalline clarity. I'd survived. That was what mattered. I'd walked out of that restaurant alive, aware, free from the lies that had been choking me. Yes, I'd aligned myself with a criminal. Yes, I'd abandoned my husband to his fate. Yes, I'd crossed lines I never imagined crossing. But I was alive, and I was free. And after months of feeling trapped in a marriage built on deception, that freedom felt like oxygen after drowning. I took a long shower, washing away the evening's tension, then climbed into bed in an unfamiliar room in an unfamiliar house, starting an unfamiliar life. Tomorrow I'd figure out what came next. Tomorrow, I'd deal with the practicalities of divorce and debt and whatever role Lorenzo needed me to play. Tomorrow, I'd start rebuilding. Tonight, I just closed my eyes and let sleep take me, knowing that whatever else happened, I'd finally stopped being Daniel's victim and started being my own person. And in the darkness of that safe house, in the quiet of that suburban night, I felt something I hadn't felt in 8 months. Peace. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, and for a few disoriented seconds, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The restaurant, Daniel's betrayal, Lorenzo's offer, the choice I'd made. I sat up slowly, my body aching like I'd been in a physical fight instead of just an emotional one. The clock on the nightstand read 9:30. I'd slept nearly 10 hours, my exhausted mind finally shutting down after months of stress and one catastrophic evening. My phone sat on the nightstand where I'd left it, and I picked it up reluctantly. 63 missed calls, over 100 text messages, voicemails from numbers I recognized and numbers I didn't. I scrolled through them with detached curiosity, like I was reading about someone else's life. Daniel's mother, hysterical and accusatory. Daniel's brother, demanding I call him immediately. My own sister, confused and worried after someone, probably Daniel's family, had called her with some version of events. Friends, acquaintances, even my old college roommate who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, all suddenly very interested in my life. I deleted them all without listening or reading. Whatever versions of the story were circulating, whatever lies Daniel had told or truths he'd revealed, none of it mattered. These people didn't know what I'd been through, didn't understand the impossible position I'd been in, didn't deserve explanations I didn't have the energy to give. There was only one message I read carefully, from Lorenzo, sent at 2 a.m. You're safe. That's what matters. Take today to rest. Tomorrow we'll talk about next steps. If you need anything, call. Simple, direct, honest. Everything Daniel's communication had never been. I found myself staring at that message longer than I should have, trying to reconcile the man who'd sent it with everything I knew about Lorenzo DeLuca. He was a criminal, responsible for God knows what kinds of violence and corruption. But he'd also been the only person yesterday who'd treated me with genuine respect, who'd given me real choices instead of manipulation disguised as protection. A knock on the bedroom door startled me. "Mrs. Russo? I've got breakfast if you're hungry." Tony's voice, muffled but friendly. I pulled on the robe I'd found in the closet and opened the door. Tony stood there with a tray. Coffee, eggs, toast, fresh fruit. The smell made my stomach growl. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten. "Thank you," I said, taking the tray. "You didn't have to do this." "Mr. DeLuca's orders. He wants you comfortable, wants you taken care of." Tony hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, ma'am. I've been doing this work for a long time. I've seen how the boss handles situations, how he treats people. You made the right call last night." It was the second time someone in Lorenzo's organization had told me that, and I realized it wasn't just reassurance. They genuinely believed it. These men, who worked in a world of violence and moral ambiguity, had a clearer sense of right and wrong in this situation than my own husband had. I ate breakfast slowly, savoring the normalcy of it. Coffee, eggs, toast, simple things that felt grounding after a night of chaos. Through the window, I could see the quiet suburban street, people heading to work, kids waiting for school buses. Life continuing normally for everyone except me. But maybe that was the point. Maybe I could find my way back to normal, eventually. A different normal, certainly, but normal nonetheless. My phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello?" "Mrs. Russo, it's Marco. Mr. DeLuca asked me to check in, see if you need anything." "I'm fine. Tony brought breakfast. The house is comfortable." I paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Daniel, what happened after I left?" Marco was quiet for a moment. Mr. DeLuca had a conversation with him. Explained the situation, made some things clear. Your husband is. He's being dealt with, but not in the way you're probably imagining. Mr. DeLuca doesn't believe in unnecessary violence. He prefers more creative solutions. What does that mean? It means your husband is alive and will stay that way as long as he cooperates. He's being relocated, let's say. Somewhere far from Chicago, far from you, with very specific instructions about his behavior going forward. He won't be a problem for you anymore. Relief and something darker, maybe satisfaction, flooded through me. Daniel was alive, but gone, removed from my life as thoroughly as if he'd died. The man who'd planned to abandon me had been abandoned himself, exiled to whatever life Lorenzo had arranged. There was a poetic justice in that. "And the Bianchis?" I asked. "Being handled. Mr. DeLuca is making it clear that you're under his protection, that you were never involved in your husband's activities. They'll back off. They're not stupid enough to challenge him over someone who's genuinely innocent." It all sounded too easy, too neat. But I was learning that in Lorenzo's world, power solved problems efficiently. He didn't need elaborate plans or careful negotiations. He simply made decisions and enforced them. And people fell in line because the alternative was worse. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I know you probably weren't supposed to share details." Marco chuckled. "Mr. DeLuca figured you'd ask. He said to tell you the truth. He doesn't believe in keeping you in the dark about things that affect your safety." After we hung up, I spent the morning exploring the house more thoroughly. It was surprisingly homey. Books on the shelves, comfortable furniture, a kitchen stocked with actual food instead of just basics. Someone had put thought into making this place livable, not just secure. I wondered how many other people had stayed here, how many other lives Lorenzo had temporarily housed while sorting out their complicated situations. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time, Lorenzo's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Hello?" "Mrs. Russo, how are you feeling?" His voice was warm, concerned in a way that seemed genuine despite everything I knew about him. Confused, exhausted, relieved, terrified, all of the above? I tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to feel right now. Whatever you're feeling is valid. You went through something traumatic. Give yourself permission to process it without judgment." He paused. "I'm calling because I wanted to explain what happens next. You deserve to understand the situation fully." I sat down on the couch, bracing myself. "I'm listening." "First, your husband. He's been relocated to a small town in Montana, given a job at a lumber mill, and provided with basic accommodations. He'll work there for the next 5 years, sending 70% of his earnings to pay down his debt to me. If he complies, if he stays where he's put and doesn't cause trouble, he'll eventually be free to start over somewhere else, if he doesn't comply." Lorenzo let that hang, the implicit threat clear. "Montana," I repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity. Daniel, who couldn't handle a day without Starbucks and high-speed internet, stuck in rural Montana. That seems almost worse than killing him. That's the idea. Death is quick. Exile is prolonged consequence. He'll have years to think about what he did, to understand that his choices led him there. Lorenzo's voice hardened slightly. "And more importantly, he'll be too far away and too monitored to ever bother you again." "What about the divorce?" I asked. "I assume I should file." "Already being handled. I have lawyers drawing up papers that will be very favorable to you. You get to keep all marital assets. He assumes all debts. And there's a clause preventing him from ever contacting you or entering Illinois again. He'll sign them. I'll make sure of that. Within a few months, you'll be legally free." It should have felt wrong, having a crime boss orchestrate my divorce. But honestly, it just felt efficient. Daniel had created this mess. Letting Lorenzo clean it up seemed appropriate somehow. "And me?" I asked. "What happens to me? You mentioned needing my help with certain things." "Yes. Let me be clear about what I'm asking because I want no misunderstandings between us." Lorenzo's tone became businesslike. "I need someone with a clean background, someone law enforcement would never suspect of being associated with my organization. Someone who can be present at certain business meetings, social events, charitable functions. Your presence would provide legitimacy, would make things appear above board." "So I'd be." "What? Your arm candy? Your fake girlfriend?" And I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. "No." Lorenzo sounded almost offended. "Nothing romantic, nothing that would compromise you in that way. Think of it more as, you'd be my associate, my consultant on certain legitimate business ventures I'm developing. I'm expanding into legal enterprises, real estate development, restaurant groups, charitable foundations. I need someone smart, presentable, and unconnected to my past activities to help manage those ventures." I processed this carefully. "You're asking me to help you launder money. I'm asking you to help me build legitimate businesses that happen to be funded by money from less legitimate sources. There's a difference. The businesses themselves will be entirely legal, will provide real jobs, will contribute to the community. Your role would be completely above board, attending meetings, signing documents, appearing at events. Nothing you'd do would be illegal, but it would be connected to illegal money." "Welcome to Chicago," Lorenzo said dryly. "Half the buildings in this city were built with mob money at some point. The question isn't whether the money's clean. It's whether what's being done with it creates something good or something harmful. It was sophistry, but I couldn't entirely dismiss it. And honestly, what choice did I have? I needed Lorenzo's protection, needed his resources to rebuild my life. If the price was lending my respectable face to his business ventures, was that really so terrible? Especially if those ventures were actually legitimate, actually helped people. How long would this arrangement last? I asked. A year, maybe 2. Long enough to establish these businesses, get them running independently. After that, you'd be free to walk away with enough money to start whatever life you want. And more importantly, you'd have my protection permanently. Anyone who threatened you would be threatening me. A year or 2 of my life, in exchange for safety and financial security. It seemed like a fair trade, especially compared to the alternatives: witness protection, living in fear, trying to rebuild from nothing while looking over my shoulder constantly. I need some time to think about this, I said, though I already knew what my answer would be. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Olivia? He used my first name for the first time, and somehow that felt significant. I want you to understand something. This isn't a trap. This isn't me manipulating you into something you can't escape. If at any point you want out, if you're uncomfortable or feel unsafe, you tell me and we'll find another solution. I don't keep people in my life against their will. The sincerity in his voice was startling. Why are you being so accommodating? You're not known for your kindness. Lorenzo laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his voice. No, I suppose I'm not. But I have rules, Olivia. I don't hurt innocents. I don't exploit people who've already been exploited. Your husband put you in an impossible situation. I'm simply offering you a way out that benefits us both. That's not kindness. That's good business. And if I say no, then I'll still protect you from the Bianchis, still help you with the divorce, still make sure you're safe. You'll just have to rebuild on your own instead of with my resources. The protection isn't conditional on your cooperation. You've earned that by being dragged into this mess unwillingly. I found myself believing him, which was probably dangerous. But everything he'd done so far had been exactly what he'd promised. Honest, direct, protective. He'd shown me more integrity in one night than Daniel had in 5 years of marriage. I'll have an answer for you tomorrow, I said finally. That's all I ask. In the meantime, rest. Read a book, watch television, take a long bath. Let yourself recover from last night. He paused. And Olivia? You're stronger than you think. You walked away from a burning building last night. Not everyone has that kind of courage. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house, turning over everything he'd said. A year or 2 working with Lorenzo, helping him build legitimate businesses, in exchange for protection and money and a chance to start over. It wasn't what I'd imagined my life would look like when I woke up yesterday morning, but then nothing about my life was what I'd imagined. I thought about Daniel, stuck in Montana, chopping wood, or whatever one did at lumber mills. Part of me felt sorry for him. He'd made mistakes, yes, but the punishment seemed severe. Then I remembered the divorce papers he'd prepared, the plane tickets to Brazil, the plan to leave me with nothing while he started fresh. My sympathy evaporated. He'd chosen to save himself at my expense. Lorenzo was simply letting him experience what that felt like. And me? I was choosing to save myself too. Not by running, not by hiding, but by accepting help from an unlikely source and rebuilding from there. Maybe it made me no better than Daniel, aligning with criminals to protect my interests. Or maybe it made me a survivor who'd learned that morality was more complicated than I'd been taught. I spent the rest of the day in quiet contemplation, letting the events of the previous night settle into something I could understand and accept. By evening, I'd made my decision. I called Lorenzo back. "I'll do it," I said when he answered. "I'll work with you, help with your businesses, play whatever role you need me to play. On one condition. Name it. You're honest with me. Always. I don't care how ugly the truth is. I want to know what I'm involved in, what risks I'm taking, what you're really doing. No more lies. No more protection through ignorance. If I'm going to be part of your world, I need to see it clearly." There was a long pause. Then Lorenzo said quietly, "That's a dangerous request, Olivia. Some things, once you know them, you can't unknow. I spent 8 months married to a man I didn't really know, living a life based on lies. I'd rather face ugly truths than comfortable deceptions. Can you promise me that?" Another pause. "Yes, I can promise you that. Complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. You'll know exactly what you're part of, exactly what risks you're taking. And if you ever want out, you just say the word. Then we have a deal. Welcome to my organization, Olivia. I think this is going to be the beginning of an interesting partnership." After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Not for the life I'd lost, but for the life I was about to build. It would be complicated, probably dangerous, definitely unconventional. But it would be mine, based on choices I'd made with full knowledge of the consequences. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet suburban street, now dark except for streetlights and the warm glow from other houses. Families were having dinner, watching television, living their normal lives. I'd never have that kind of normal again. But maybe I'd find something better. A life built on truth instead of lies, on strength instead of naivety, on choices instead of circumstances. Daniel had tried to drag me down with him when his world collapsed. Instead, I'd found a different path, one I never could have imagined. Tomorrow, that path would begin in earnest. Tonight, I stood in the safe house Lorenzo had provided, feeling more like myself than I had in years. The woman who'd walked into that restaurant last night, desperate to save her marriage, willing to overlook red flags, ready to forgive anything, was gone. In her place stood someone harder, wiser, more willing to make difficult choices. Someone who understood that survival sometimes meant aligning with devils you could see instead of trusting angels who turned out to be demons in disguise. I pulled out Lorenzo's card, running my thumb over the embossed numbers. This small piece of cardstock represented safety, power, protection, things I'd thought my marriage would provide but never had. Now I'd found them in the last place I expected, from a man I should fear, but somehow trusted more than the one I'd vowed to spend my life with. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from Lorenzo. "Sleep well, Olivia. Tomorrow we start building your new life." I smiled at that message, feeling a flutter of something that might have been excitement, or anticipation, or just relief at finally having a plan. I replied simply, "Looking forward to it." Then I turned off my phone, climbed into bed in my temporary sanctuary, and let myself drift off to sleep. No more nightmares about Daniel's lies. No more anxiety about money or danger or uncertainty. Just the quiet confidence that came from finally taking control of my own fate, even if it meant accepting help from Chicago's most dangerous man. Outside, Tony kept watch in the guest house. Somewhere in the city, Lorenzo orchestrated whatever needed orchestrating. And in Montana, Daniel was probably settling into his new life, learning what exile felt like. But here, in this quiet bedroom, in this safe house, I was simply at peace for the first time in months. The old Olivia, the trusting wife, the woman who'd believed in fairy tales and happy endings, was dead. The new Olivia, the survivor, the one willing to make hard choices, was just being born. And tomorrow, under Lorenzo De Luca's protection and guidance, she would learn exactly what she was capable of becoming. I closed my eyes and surrendered to sleep, ready for whatever came next.